I was in full founder mode, dropping bombs and zingers every other sentence. Like it was just always for the reaction, always for the boom, like, oh, he's dropped some knowledge bomb that we just have to incorporate. And so inward attention on okay, no, as you progress and if you want to progress as a leader, you have to create the environment that you bring that best out in everybody.
Hey, welcome to the show. I am Andrew Kaplan, and in this show, I chat with my SaaS heroes. Those are people who work on or around cross-functional growth teams to explore their career journeys and have candid conversations about their toughest moments that they encounter along the way. And my guest today is epic. It is Aakash Gupta. He's a former VP of product turned creator, and he currently writes one of the largest product growth newsletters in the world. He also hosts a product growth podcast. I'm going to be a guest in a future episode. And he and I chatted about a mix of really tough moments in his career and the frameworks that he uses to keep going where other folks might have gotten stuck along the way. Some of those moments that we're going to dig into is the ego hit of a failed startup venture in his early 20s. We talk about how he was known as the zinger guy and received some tough feedback from his CMO. We talked about how he had to put someone on a performance improvement plan that went a little ballistic and actually tried to create a case against him as the manager. And we talked about how he manages imposter syndrome. We covered a ton of ground in this episode. Let's go ahead and jump right in.
Grew up in a place called Kalamazoo, Michigan, and the airport sells shirts that, yes, Kalamazoo does exist. So I guess that's a fun fact for some folks out there. And it was cool being in Western Michigan, which is a pretty rural area, but being in a college town. So Kalamazoo has Western Michigan University, Kalamazoo College, KVCC, their community college, and it just feels like an academic atmosphere, actually. So when I grew up, I was always involved with my dad, who was a professor of computer science and techie stuff, building computers, playing video games, whether it was Halo through to Fortnite, and then also programming. So luckily, he pushed me to do programming courses in middle school, in high school, be on the competitive teams in high school. Whereas most people were out barbecuing on Sunday afternoon, I was just in front of the computer, on the USACO competitive programming scene on the weekends in high school. So I was really getting pretty good at tech and I could build products, websites, those types of things myself. When I was in college, I was actually working with a company to more in a development role. And that helped me eventually make it into product management. So that's kind of where my journey was from youth into product management.
Dude, super cool. And if we could go back in time and talk to a friend of yours from high school, how would they describe you?
So in high school, my school used to do morning announcements. And I used to also compete in public speaking competitions for extemporaneous speaking or debate. Anytime I competed, which was maybe 20 weekends a year, they would announce it on Monday morning. So I think I just suddenly became known as the debater guy. And I was pretty intense about that and traveling around the country all the time and often missing Monday school just because whatever travel thing was going on. So they'd probably say that, yeah, that guy was really obsessed with debate. And outside of that, I played tennis. I was on the tennis team. But yeah, just a very normal American Indian teen.
And in retrospect, is getting into debate sort of a foreshadowing to getting into growth? I feel like there's a lot of parallels there where when you get into growth, it's more like using data as the influence to debate versus maybe orally. Do you see the parallels there?
Definitely. I think that debate is a good entry point into any sort of growth, marketing, product management role, because you're always you're writing a document for a proposal for X new feature or X new marketing campaign or X new test on whatever demand gen channel that you have already established. So it's very similar in that regards where you're preparing an argument and then where are you debating it? You're defending it to your VP. You have to fund this decision or to your sales team retroactively of why you focused on this instead of something else. And so those two skill sets in particular, writing and being able to deal with people in a team oriented way, I think translated over pretty well. And then probably the final thing is most debaters actually become lawyers, but the ones who don't, they tend to do well wherever they are just because it's such a nerdy extracurricular activity to be reading philosophy and news. So you can't just help learning along the way.
It's funny. My parents said when I was a little kid, they thought I was going to grow up to be a lawyer. because I was always arguing my case. I was always questioning, well, how do you know this? And how did you learn this? And well, what about this other thing over here? And so I definitely see the parallels there. So what was your first step from a young kid that's into debate, that's into computer programming? What's your first step into the SaaS world?
Yeah, so the first company out of college. So when I was working for them more in a development capacity, I very quickly realized that they didn't even know what to build, right? So they would ask me like, redesign the homepage. And it's like, well, what are our goals here? What is like the primary CTA? Is it sign up? Is it login? Who is our primary ICP? What type of language should we use? What type of hero image are they used to appearing on similar pages? Are we going to have people who are logged in appear on the logged out homepage or the logged in homepage? None of these questions had answers. They were just like, yep, you do it. And so I quickly found myself like having to answer these things. And when I stumbled upon like product management content, it was like eyes opened, like, oh, there is a method to this madness. There's an entire field devoted to how to do this correctly. So in college itself, I basically switched over to the product management activities where for the dev team, because I was handling those activities, I started to be the one who was doing that for everybody. And so that was how I ended up working at this B2B SaaS company. What they did was they actually had 45% of the D1 college schools, like University of Michigan football, University of Alabama football, Duke basketball, like the big programs that have a lot of field recruiters. If you think about it, way back in like 2008, well, the iPhone is out. They now have their iPhone. They don't need to take notes and go home and transcribe those notes and then put them into the player file and talk about it at a meeting, right? On their phone, while they're there, they can put in, yeah, I scouted this guy, here's the scouting report. Or yeah, I took this guy's parents out to dinner, here's what we talked about. So they would be able to put all that information in on the cloud, on the go, enabled by this revolutionary new technology, the smartphone. And so that was what we built a really successful company upon.
That's dope, dude. So that's your first gig out of college. Probably a cool first job, I would imagine.
Yeah, so a lot of going on site with the field recruiter. So having been at University of Michigan, where sports are like such a big part of the college experience, and then being able to work with those programs was fun.
And so you go on to have, from the outside looking in, an insane career, right? ThreaddUp, Epic Games, Affirm, Apollo. Now you run as a creator, one of the most popular product growth newsletters. I think it's easy for someone to look at you from the outside and think, this is someone who just always wins. They must be successful at every stage in the journey. And so I'm curious to know, I know that probably hasn't been how it has felt along the way. And so I'd love to explore some of those moments with you. Can we start with a low moment in your journey?
So the last time I was a founder, and now I'm a founder again with a business, but the last time I hired a team, we had a team of 7 of folks working on an app called Rap to Beats. It hit 350,000 monthly active users. Then we had this like monetization.
And what was it?
challenge.
Sorry, Rap 2 Beats?
Yeah,
Because
so
it sounds like
basically,
it's going to be a cool product. I just want to get the TLDR on it.
yeah, for people listening who are like 35-year-old, they might not need to do it, but their kids maybe like to, right? If your kids practice rapping, what's the process for practicing rapping? Well, you need to find a beat, then you need to record it, and then you need to like look at it, edit it. Maybe you want to write down some of the verses before too that you can integrate into your rap. So that's basically like the set of use cases that we solved is we gave people a free beats library for acquisition, premium beats if they wanted to actually record a song, and interface to like put their raps down and record. So yeah, it was just it's super simple. Like honestly, like ChatGPT could create our entire app now probably in like 5 minutes. But in 2008, it was more about be on the App Store. You're going to get all sorts of organic acquisition. Like Apple might even feature you on the App Store. And like any day you do, you're going to get like a huge spike of 20,000 downloads and stuff like that. So we rode the wave of the platform there. And we grew. We were able to like, it was bootstrapped. So we didn't like do any VC funding or any such thing. We were able to like pay people, pay ourselves, which was nice. But we like had bigger aspirations. We weren't doing it, especially when you're that young, like in your early 20s, you're not doing it for a lifestyle business. Now I'm running like basically a lifestyle business. Like I just care about the profits. At the time, we cared about like growing the business, growing the revenue, growing the team. I think back then, like what we thought the coolest thing was to say like, yeah, I'm the CEO of a company with 7 people, or one day 70, and then one day 700, and then one day 7,000. That's like the mental picture you paint for yourself of what you can do. And so we had to end work on that project. So basically, revenue just flatlined for like almost a whole year. We tried different experiments, premium beats, like I mentioned, ultimately never really took off for problems like because we didn't create a true like studio editing experience or like really handle all the copyright stuff. So that never took off. We decided like we're done with this project. And that was definitely the lowest point for me because we had to have a group leadership meeting like, yes, this is it. Like, we're all going our separate ways. We're not focused on this anymore. And I think that, when you just build up that set of dreams, it's like, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing. I'm a founder now. And then, oh no, I guess not. I guess I'm just going to go back into industry, back into product and growth. So it was like a wake up call that you should take experiments, I think, in your career, but sometimes they might not work out. And it's okay if you've built like kind of a good background set of things that you can revert back to. And everybody on the team, had those skills, whether they were designers or engineers or PMs, so they were able to.
And for context, you said this was in 2008. Was that correct?
Rap to Beats, 2010 to 2014.
And so it was during that era. I'm asking to contextualize it for my own self, because I feel like that was during this really magical era of Silicon Valley companies, where it was like Facebook was getting really big then. And you were hearing about all these really young CEOs that were kind of our age. They were building these massive companies. And so I could imagine how that would feel, where you're like, oh, this is my turn. This is my thing. I'm going to grow this into this big thing. And so then you kind of have this, in addition to like a financial blow, really an ego blow a little bit as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, mainly an ego blow, which I'm sure many people listening can empathize with. We get those sometimes in our career, but I think it's just the price of being ambitious, ultimately, I always try to dream bigger, like 10x bigger. I love those questions that people ask, like, okay, you're going for 1 million ARR, why not 10 million ARR? And so I love to ask those questions, and it was mainly a symptom of that.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people who are nervous to do their own thing because the story they tell themselves in their head is, well, if it fails, now I'm going to have to explain this as, in my next interview. And I'm going to feel like a loser when I do that. And I'm not going to know how to explain it. And they're going to look at me and think I'm not good at what I do. One, did you feel any of that in your brain? And two, how did you navigate that?
Yes, 100%, 210% actually. So I was really lucky to have a mentor though, who he was just awesome. So his name is Brian Ramau. He was working at LinkedIn at the time. And he was just super nice. Like I knew him from college. I looked up to him at the University of Michigan. I think he was like 2 years ahead of me. And so when I was out in the Valley, I just like sent him a message as we were winding down. Basically, I was trying to get a referral into LinkedIn and like reconnect the relationship with him. But it was awesome because he took a look at my resume and he was just like, dude, your resume is great. Like they love startup founders here at LinkedIn and Facebook and Google and these top tier tech companies. You have the exact profile they want. So wear that badge super proudly. Talk about how the founder stuff you did, the percentage of it that was in the discipline you're going for, whether that's product or growth. And you usually can still speak to those stories almost as deeply. So just wear the badge proud. And yeah, I was surprised because I remember that was one of the reasons we didn't want to dissolve. That's the reason it stayed longer than it probably should have too, is because we were just worried about, are we going to be able to have something as high ego of a job as we had given ourselves for the next thing. But for none of us did it actually turn out hard at all. We also just benefited from like in 2014, tech was going crazy in San Francisco.
Yeah, so the tide was coming in, even though you were on a ship that ultimately didn't make it, the tide was still going in the right direction. And you had learned a ton of cool stuff that then you could parlay into interesting stories and lots of good experience and ultimately land the next thing, which is great. So your journey continues on. I'm always curious to hear folks talk about some tough feedback, either feedback they've had to give to someone or feedback they've had to receive. Maybe we can start on the receiving end because I feel like that's always the hardest. What's a time in your career where you felt like you got some really tough feedback that you kind of had to brace for a little bit?
Yeah, so my next role was at ThreaddUp. I was really fortunate that, and now I reflect back, even I can't give this much time to my teams, but my CMO, CEO, CTO, they spent a ton of time with their people at ThreaddUp. And so I was always in meetings with those folks on different topics. And our CMO had hired a new brand director. And I was not being welcoming and professional and open to her ideas and opinions in retrospect. And my CMO sat me down and said, like, gosh, like what you said in that meeting a week ago, I can't think about anything else but that for the last week. It like shook me to my core that like he wanted to give me this feedback. I remember I didn't even respond well in the meeting because my manager afterwards came to me and was like, the CMO is worried that you're going to leave the company. And at the time I was making like a ginormous impact on the company. And so they couldn't afford to lose me. And so I like somehow managed to like have the most immature response you could have to such feedback. But I told him like, no, I want us to hit the company. I just didn't handle the feedback very well. So that was like a time where it really like shook me that I heard it and I didn't handle it well. And I think it was because I was coming from that founder role where very few people give you real feedback like that, especially somebody who's your skip level manager or equivalent to your skip level manager. And so for me, it was like, wow, this senior person, he sat me down. But now that I look at it, like he was amazing and we have a great relationship. We still talk now because, yeah, he cared about me enough to like find me, tell me, express it. And I would say I didn't even adjust to the feedback in the first few weeks, but eventually I did adjust.
So you kind of got a double whammy here. So you're in a meeting with the CMO, you do something that they react to, you get feedback on that meeting with the CMO later, and then your reaction to that feedback wasn't good either. And so you're kind of in this like just in like a tough spot basically, right?
They didn't judge it as bad just because like basically like I just retreated and withdrew and like they were starting to wonder like if I was like going to leave the company and they couldn't afford to have me leave. So it actually flipped to like being good and like I ended up getting a raise like a week or two later. So but I don't recommend that strategy to anybody. It's not the right way to respond.
Yeah. How did the raise come into play?
I was underpaid for the amount of impact I was having. I mean, the reason I was in the room with the CMO, like at the time, like I had been a founder. So if you've been a founder, I think it's very easy for you to just go into a company right away, immediately see what the problems are, start contributing value. So it was like across the board, whether it was operations, marketing, product, literally every part of the business I was jumping into, like, here's things we need to do. And all those things were working out. And so yeah, that's what they suddenly got worried because they were just giving me the feedback to make me even better because I was a good person and they wanted to grow me.
And so the initial meeting, I don't want you to share anything that you're not comfortable sharing publicly, but the initial meeting, I'm going to assume you had a reaction based on some part of the marketing plan. Is that fair to assume?
Basically, like one of the many things I had done, as you can see now, like I'm pretty good at writing on social media. So one of the things I had done is I'd created like thousands of Facebook ads for ThreaddUp and thousands of like very product driven campaigns with customized landing pages and all sorts of stuff. And just based on what worked, the word thrift really worked, calling it a thrift store. So like we had this one post, I think it was like a story that I purposely put misspellings in so it looked organic. At the time, the sponsored tag on Facebook newsfeed was very small. 99% of people didn't even see it. So it looked completely organic where I talked about how there was this cool new thrift store I found. And it's so cool because there's so many items and it's much bigger than my local thrift store. And I love going to my local thrift store. So I had written this like giant story. And this story was getting like 10-cent CPMs in an era where average CPM on Facebook was like $7.50. That's how much Facebook liked this post. Like in a world of organic reach, they would have just, in a world of TikTok, they would have just given it 54 million views for free. It was just like one of those viral posts. And I had written that, right? And so basically like that was one of the biggest wins we had in the growth marketing area. And it was one of those things where I had just rolled up my sleeves, done it soup to nuts. Wasn't even really my responsibility area, but I had unlocked like hundreds of thousands of new customers for the company. And then somebody's coming in and asking questions like, should we be calling ourselves a thrift store and blah, 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 blah. And me being more growth and data driven, I was just like, we tried your branding of consignment store. You know, we wrote 1,000 ads. That was maybe like 50 ads. And we quickly learned that the CPMs on that are like $25 because the types of people who shop at a consignment store are super rich and everybody's competing for those people. But I basically just said it like that in the meeting with everybody. And, you know, especially to a new person, she was also at a level higher than me at the time. I wasn't director yet. It wasn't like the right way to handle it. And so, yeah, he gave me the feedback that like, yeah, it left me like staying up all night because he was a big fan of her. I think she's even still at the company and super successful. So he was a huge fan of her. She was awesome. And I had just like been like a nit in her onboarding. And so that had left him. And so he brought that up to me super nicely.
And so what's the lesson here? Like, what's the thing that you take away with you that makes you better from this?
For me, I think it was a wake-up call in terms of how you need to act if you're not the founder. But even if you are the founder, you know, think carefully about how you speak. In fact, as you go higher and higher up the ranks, I think it's even more and more important as you go director, VP, as I learned in later roles, to just have the highest amount of integrity, to really have super high emotional intelligence, to really think about yes, we need to get to the right thing. We need to do the right thing, but how we get there does matter. How people feel along the way, especially as you scale, does matter. In a startup, it matters less than a scale up, then it matters less than an enterprise, but it does matter.
And have there been any resources, books, or other methods or coaches or anything like that that have helped you work on this skill as your career progressed?
Yeah, I think that like more personal inward attention. So inward attention, first of all, to like how it's coming off in meetings. I think I was in full founder mode at that time, full like Brian Cheskyism, dropping bombs and zingers every other like sentence. That was probably my entire personality leading up to that moment too, like being a debater and being a public speaker. Like it was just always for the reaction, always for the boom, like, oh, he's changed the course of this meeting. He's dropped some knowledge bomb that we just have to incorporate. That's how I used to behave. And so inward attention on like, okay, no, as you progress and if you want to progress as a leader, you have to create the environment that you bring that best out in everybody. So that from me solving the problem to helping everybody solve the problem. I don't know about everybody listening, but at least for me, like when I was in high school or college, I was just the person who like carried the group project, right? I wasn't the person who like split up the responsibilities. Like I would, but then I'd notice that nobody was doing stuff to my standards and then I would just do the entire thing. So I was like that type of person. And that's how I was approaching my meetings. And I realized business is not like this. So having that first kind of mental shift that like business, like if you see like people who go ahead, it's often like the team players. That's why there's such a high value placed on people with team sports experience, because you need to have that ability to make everybody around you better. So I think that first one of like inward attention and changing from founder mode to manager mode, because hell, I was a manager, I wasn't a founder. So that was the big one. The second one for me was, again, more on the theme of inward attention, but actually what I at the time, I was sleeping like 5 hours a day and I was grinding, like straight grinding, 19 hours a day, working. Like I lived in Palo Alto, the office was in San Francisco. So I had like a 2 hour commute on each side of work. I was the first into the office, last out of the office. And on those commutes in and out of work, I was working on work. So I was like a straight grinder. And so I realized like, no, I need to take care of my emotional health, my physical health. So I started making a point to go to the gym every day, making a point to do yoga before work, making it a point to not work that much on the train rides over and back. And doing all of those things together, I became a more mellow, better emotionally intelligent person. And probably most importantly, realistically, was sleeping more. Like when you go from sleeping 5 hours to sleeping 8.5 to 9, your own third person view of how you're acting is so much better.
What is one thing that someone could do if they're listening to this? I love the way you described it. I think I wrote it down. You were like, I was here for the zingers. So if there's someone else who hears that line and thinks, fucking A, I love a good zinger. Like that's me. I'm the person who's quick. I'm trying to get people to react. I tend to push things forward. I can be a little bit brash at times. If there's someone listening to this who identifies in that way, what's one thing that they can do to work on that skill that you just talked about? Before we hear from Aakash, I wanted to take a quick second to just remind you to please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're enjoying this conversation on. The algorithms seem to really like it, and so as your host, I would really appreciate it too. Okay, back to Aakash.
I think you just made a great first step by identifying. And now you've identified it in the abstract after the fact about your personality. How do you identify it pre the fact in a meeting, right? So you need to create this almost mental space, like almost like a protocol. You know, you look at like a basketball player when they go up to the free throw line, you know, everybody has their own little thing. They double dribble it and then they lick their finger or whatever they do. They look up or whatever thing they might do, right? It's almost your same thing. In a meeting, before I say this thing, like, let me just double check. Is there any chance that somebody in the room is going to be offended by this if you're more brash? Or is there potentially a way I can say this that is going to be couched so that it doesn't come off as brash? So I think that if you are brash, you probably already have a reputation for being brash. And so you almost have to be extra not brash in order to slowly wither away that reputation. So create that ability to do that in the moment. And I've coached some people who have trouble even after they're sleeping, working out, not working too much. And the final thing that often is the unlock for them is meditation. It's just this idea that you can have this emptiness, that you can kind of examine how you're thinking, how you're feeling. So I know it sounds woo-woo, but it tends to be a big unlock if those other things aren't working for you.
Doesn't sound woo-woo to me, man. Meditation, I would say, has changed my life and opened the door to me to explore a lot of different alternative self-improvement disciplines. Have you explored any others, just out of curiosity?
Self-improvement disciplines, I guess like I'm a very like phasey life optimizer, you could say. So basically like every sort of life optimization thing out there, I've definitely given a try, whether it's athletic greens or cold plunges or meditation or NSDR or Eisenhower matrix or leverage neutral overhead framework. So I've tried it all basically. I think I actually like that. Like, I don't know if the listeners here have done a lot of working out, but I've been working out basically since I was like 12 years old, roughly. So almost, like 25 years of working out. And I wasn't on the same program the entire time, right? Sometimes I was on a push pull leg bro split. Sometimes I was on a 5 day a week. Other times I was on a 1 day a week. There was like different phases, different programs that I was on. And I feel like for me, like know the entire universe. And I tend to get excited about what's most popular in the zeitgeist at the time for the creators I followed. When I was following Huberman pre the scandal, he was all about NSDR. So I was doing NSDR. When I was following Sahil Bloom before he became a little bit too big and started getting too general, he was really about waking up early. So I was really about waking up early. So those are the ones I've tried. I'm curious though for you, what are the alternative ones that have worked for you?
I have gone down the rabbit hole of hypnotherapy a little bit. Not formally, like I haven't paid to go somewhere, but I have spent a substantial amount of time in hypnotherapy algorithms and like doing hypnosis and in YouTube and on TikTok and things like that. And that's one that has been really interesting for me to try to manifest success and abundance and specific outcomes and goals that I have and things like that. It's similar to meditation. You feel similar to when you come out of a meditation where you feel very grounded, very present. Sometimes you have a little bit of that warm glow feeling, although not every time. And that's something that I've gotten very into. It's actually interesting. Just today, I released an episode of the podcast with Emma Stratton. She's the founder of Punchy, which is messaging for B2B SaaS companies. And she was telling me that she got really into chakra and energy work. And she was telling me how she had this money mindset challenge where when she went on her own and she became a creator and a business owner, that really she had a mental block to making more money. And I was like, well, how did you work on that? Did you read books? Did you go to a therapist? And she was like, well, I did all that stuff. And the thing that worked most for me was she was like, I met with an energy healer. And I was like, I got to hear more about that. Maybe I needed energy. And so I'm always curious for folks who aren't scared of that kind of stuff, what things they've tried and what benefits they've gotten from it.
Yeah, I haven't gotten quite to the energy chakra stuff. I know that there's like people are really into like grounding and different things like that. One thing that I do have probably adapted maybe like 10 years ago and haven't been as phasey about and have kept up with is walks outside in nature. Especially now that I'm a creator, I just find like it's actually better for me than doing like a 2 hour work block to do like an hour and a half work block and a 30-minute walk in nature.
So nice. It's a privilege to be able to do that, right? To be able to own your own schedule, to get out there in nature. I try to do that as much as I can too. So it took a little bit of a detour there, but a fun one. So I'm curious now. So let's go back to some of the stuff that we were talking about. Tell me about another moment. So we just talked about feedback that you received and how you worked through that. How about on the other side? What has been a time where you had to have either a tough conversation or give some tough feedback that was difficult?
Yeah, so I had to put someone on a PIP pretty early into a job. So I would say that even I wasn't necessarily confident that this person was underperforming because I think it's actually hard to assess a product or growth person in only like a month or a month and a half. I definitely felt like, yeah, they're probably not who I would have hired, but I wasn't like at the level that like we need to start transitioning them out. But basically everybody was already ready to let this person go. And so I decided, you know what? I just can't do that. I can't do that in like my first 6 weeks.
And just for context, what a shitty position to be in, right? To go into a company, everyone's like, oh, we should have fired this person. Could you fire them? And you're like, well, I'm brand new. I'm a new manager here. I'm new to this company. I don't even know the cultural background or whatever baggage y'all have brought to this point. And you're kind of left holding the bag. So I just want to contextualize, like that's a tough spot for anybody to be in.
Yeah. And I didn't actually realize that they wanted to fire them when I started. So I spent, I would say, almost like an hour or two a day those first 6 weeks trying to improve this person's craft already. So I was like spending way too much time with this person. And then I had to put them on a personal improvement plan or whatever you want to call it, a PIP. And they did not react well at all. They went totally ballistic. They talked to everybody And they sent them a bunch of screenshots of my Slack messages of times where they felt like, because I didn't realize that I was about to put this person on a PIP. So I was mainly focused on making sure that the part of the product they owned, we immediately fixed. Like we had a great
So you're having
roadmap.
some major coaching conversations, right? You're leaning in, you're really trying to be direct, you're trying to help them improve, but they maybe screenshotted it and thought they were building a case, or you were...
And I was working crazy hard. So they're like screenshotting, look, he sent this message at like 1 a.m. Like he's such a toxic manager. But like me on the flip side, like I was a new leader. Like being a leader is already like a 50-hour week job. And then trying to improve like an IC is like another 10 hours on top of that. So that was the only time of day I could send such a message. So yeah, he screenshot all this stuff, basically created a hugely negative bubble of reputation around me, all, by the way, in like one evening. And like this person, he or she messaged like everybody that had formerly worked with to get basically like advocacy and put together like an advocacy packet that they shared with me the next day. And obviously we had to let go of that person that day itself. And so, yeah, that was a very challenging moment.
Jeez. I want to explore this from a few angles, and please tell me if I ask anything that you're not comfortable sharing. But maybe we can go back in time a little bit, because it's funny. I'm coaching somebody right now who's in this position. Their manager left. They got promoted to being the head of their department. And there are some legacy folks that now they're having to put on PIPs, and is one of the things that I'm helping them work through. And so for you, is this the first time you had to put somebody on a PIP?
No.
Okay. So I was going to ask if you prepped for the conversation, and if you did prep for it, how you prepped.
Yeah, I prepped a lot. I actually even asked one of the HR people to like do the conversation with me, because I knew those conversations were really hard. So I had not only created a very good case document supporting evidence, et cetera, plus improvement plan that I honestly believe could take this person to staying at the job, even though a lot of my peers and upper level didn't believe that they could stay.
Yeah.
So I had like kind of done everything heartfelt in my power to do it well.
And is the PIP meeting, is that in person or was that remote?
Well, the company was remote.
Yeah. And did the person know? Like, were they caught off guard by it? Is that why they were so upset?
They were hugely surprised, especially just because you can imagine like maybe like 12 hours earlier, we're like deep in discussions about how to build a particular feature. So, yeah.
So they put together this advocacy packet. They sent it to you the next day, or did you get it that night?
So people pinged me the night of. Interestingly enough, I had somehow like fallen asleep at like 11 o'clock. Thank God. At that time, I wasn't sleeping very much. And so the people had been pinging me warnings actually at night that he's like doing this crazy thing. And then I heard about it the morning of.
And so luckily you didn't see it, right? Because if it was me, that probably would have impacted my whole night of sleep. I would have been stressed. I would have been compelled to respond. So luckily you didn't see it. So you wake up, you see all these messages. What goes through your mind then?
Yeah, I was just like, what a mess. Like my job is probably at risk at this point, right? First of all, like they were just ready to let the person go. I spoke up for the person. And then this has happened. And they have spread all this negative stuff about me now to everybody else. So I was just in like a space of, but then I realized, you know what, I'm a leader. And so I actually I took my morning meditation where I really just realized like how would a leader approach this? And this goes back to like,
oh, dude, I love this, right? So ask yourself, what would the best version of me do in this situation versus letting your adrenal glands take over or whatever?
Yeah. And so immediately it was like, first, like the people who were warning me, talk to them, resolve those messages, then go to my manager and my skip manager and some of the peers who were involved with initially considering letting this person go and say, I think that based on what I've heard about what happened last night, I should let him go, he or she, to go today. And so do we think we should do that? If so, we can work with HR and make that happen. And that morning itself, everybody said, yep, do it. And so then I worked with HR and we let the person go.
So how did that all feel?
I felt bad for the person mainly just because like I've been spending the last 6 weeks trying to like recover this person. So I just felt bad that they responded immaturely to the PIP.
And so for you personally, you said, hey, I was nervous that this might impact my standing at the company. In retrospect, was that true?
Yes, I think it did affect my standing, mainly because, if you've worked with somebody for years, you definitely develop trust in their opinion. And if they start to say something bad about someone, then you're starting to like almost maybe look or notice for those things in that person, those characteristics in the future working. So it was very obvious for the next 6 months or so who he had talked to and who cared about what this person had said about me.
And knowing what you know now, if you could go back in time, would you have done anything differently? Hey, this is Andrew, and before we hear from Aakash, I wanted to take a quick second to remind you that my primary job is coaching and mentoring people that work in growth and encounter these exact type of challenges in their day-to-day roles. So if you feel like you could use a little bit of help breaking through your current plateau to get to the next level in your career, I would love to support you. Please head to deliveringvalue.co/coaching and sign up for a call with me to see if we might be a good match for each other. Okay, back to Aakash.
Yeah, now I think I wouldn't have put the person on the pip. Now I'm like a little bit less, I don't know, I'm a little bit harder now. I battle hardened years later, now having had to put more people on pips and had similar sort of things and had to do layoffs and different things like that in different roles. I've started to realize, yeah, when the writing's on the wall as a leader, and I've started to realize this, my mistake at that time was I thought my primary team was the team I managed. It wasn't. It's the exec team.
How did you learn this? This was a breakthrough moment for me in my career. How did you come to that realization?
I don't know. I don't think anybody told me. I just realized. I think I looked back at the job before in particular. And in the job before, originally I had looked down on the tenure of some of the leaders who they kept switching disciplines like every 9 months. But then as I learned more about that, I realized what they were doing was they were going into areas of the business and shutting down entire teams by finding out there wasn't an ROI there. So they're actually doing the business a great service, and the executives were their biggest fans. And so I realized you basically need this garbage collection in a company, especially once you're a scale up. You've scaled up, right? You've hired some B players, some C players. You have developed some functions that some prior leader installed, and just by legacy, those functions have continued to grow and grow. But you really do need to cut the ripcord on them. They might be entire product areas, they might be entire teams, they might be entire departments I've seen even. So now that I have a little more wisdom behind me, it's when the writing's on the wall, when your team, who is the exec team, thinks something, prioritize what they think. Prioritize being on their side and not protecting your org's turf.
It took me so long to learn that last lesson. I did the opposite of that. And I think a lot of people do the opposite of that, which is all of a sudden you're the leader of your capability, but you almost think about your capability as your first team. So when something happens in the business that you don't agree with, you almost kind of confide in your team, I don't really like this decision, or yeah, it's kind of bullshit, or yeah, let's just play along. It'll probably change again in a couple months anyways. And then what you learn, somebody had to tell me this. I was on a leadership team, and it wasn't just a me thing. They just said, hey, just so we're all on the same page, this is our first team. Your functional team is your second team, but this is the team we're optimizing for. And I was like, oh, I've had it backwards. And so I needed somebody to tell me. And I was curious if anybody had told you directly.
Yeah, no, just recently on my podcast, someone used that phrase and it crystallized it for me. So I wish I had known it more concretely when I was an operator.
Yeah, me too, man. So you talked about meditation earlier. For me, in my personal journey, I got really into meditation because I went through a period of time where I was overly stressed at work. I was feeling really anxious all the time. I had a few panic attacks, which were new experiences for me and pretty overwhelming. I'm curious for you if you ever struggle with anxiety or imposter syndrome or burnout in your own journey, and two, if meditation has been a part of the solution for you there, or if there's other things that you lead on.
Yeah, so I was leading growth product at a company, and then I stepped into leading one of the 7 core product areas. And that was when I definitely felt a lot of imposter syndrome, because for the prior few years, I had been leading growth product. And growth product is this horizontal function. It can go across any product area, and it's all about driving metrics. Once you own a core product area, well, you need to make sure, for instance, all the bug requests are fulfilled and you've gotten all your Sev zeros and your Sev ones down. You need to make sure that you're building new product areas that are net new, that a growth team won't even be touching until they're baked for 2 years. You need to make sure that the NPS and CSAT of customers is good by delivering features that won't deliver any growth at all, but just keep you up with the market. So there's all these other types of buckets of features that you have to build. And my muscle for that had withered over years of just focusing on growth. So I felt this anxiety, this imposter syndrome on the round, can I do it right? I started to over lean in on the people on my team who had done core PM more recently, but they weren't at my level. They couldn't think at my level. And so then I had to figure out how am I going to step up out of this? I would say that in this particular phase of life, meditation wasn't the hotness for me. So at this phase of life, I was really into rock climbing. And rock climbing is almost like a physical form of meditation on the wall, where what it really does well is like, especially if you're lead climbing outdoors, like I tend to do, because I get stuck with the lead just because I'm better than my partners. I could break my leg. I could kill myself if I don't do this right. So I'm 100% zoned in on this particular thing. And I think it allowed me to just have that separation where sometimes even when you're with your partner, you can still have that background anxiety about work. But if you're just rock climbing, if life or death is on the line or life or death of your partner is on the line, you have to be focused. And so that gave me that separation ability, I think, to be able to see like, yes, I don't maybe necessarily have these skills in my recent past, but I have them in my distant past. Plus, I have a first principles skill set, right? The same growth skill set around discovery, around delivery. So I can just bring that same first principles skill set to these old school problems.
That's really interesting to think about rock climbing. Do you think the ability to figure it out on the wall translates to the confidence that you'll be able to figure it out in other areas of your life?
So the interesting thing about rock climbing is there's different ways to do it. The way I tend to do it is called like the try hard way, where like you'll fall off a route and then you'll just keep trying it and keep trying it until you like pass that particular section and you hit the next clip. And then you just keep going until you hit the top. So that's like how I tend to climb. And I think that's how I tend to approach life as well. It's like, when there's a setback, it's like, okay, I need to fight through it. I need to regroup. In rock climbing, they talk about it as you need new beta. So what's new beta at work? It's almost like you need a different strategy at work. Maybe I need to kill 50% of my existing meetings, so I have more deep work time for the next 2 weeks. Or maybe I need to go to a team offsite for us to just like really focus in on this problem. And so I think it allowed me to just think that through.
And where does that come from? Like, is that just built into you? Does that come from family, childhood stuff? Like, where does that come from? Because I think there's a lot of people who could hear that story or hear the imposter syndrome that you felt at work and think, fuck, if that happened to me, I'd probably just quit tech and open up a cafe or something like that. But that's not the mindset that you have. And so that's really interesting. I'm curious why.
That's a great question. I know my partner said she chose me because of my ambition, and she tends to say that's the sexiest thing she finds about me to this day. So that's probably just like a core-based ambition, which I would probably attribute to like my dad, who was really good at telling tales about like, if you go to Berkeley, if you go to Stanford, and I've done this and this, and I met this and this person. And I used to basically just think he was the coolest person in the world for doing all of that and telling these tales. So I think that he built in that ambition. I think he's a first generation immigrant. So I think that they tend to be ambitious if they moved all the way across the world just to better life for their family. So I think he built that into me really well, where I just have this core ambition. And then around the reaction to setbacks and continue trying, I think that for me, that probably came most actually from debate. For me, the debate background for me was that I went to a small school, but managed to perform as if I had gone to a big school and win national championships and go to college for debate. So I have constantly had setbacks. Like the other team, their coach would be watching my round before I debated them. I didn't have a coach to go watch around. The other teams, they would have coaches who were responsible for writing their files. Those coaches had 15, 20 years of experience writing files. I didn't have anybody to even proofread my files. So I think that having to overcome a lot of adversity in that, which was like my extracurricular activity that I focused on the most, really prepared me for that. And then when you're a founder, you do the same thing. So when I was working on Rap to Beats, it's like, yeah, I don't even know how to use Photoshop. Well, I'm just going to learn how to use Photoshop. And so I think it built up over my life.
Oh, that's really cool. And for folks who are listening that aren't into rock climbing, that didn't do debate when they were younger, what's one thing that they could work on that would help them if they're going through one of those periods of time where they're feeling a little imposter syndrome and things are flaring up?
So for me, I feel like the biggest thing about imposter syndrome, or the biggest, most effective tool for me, is creating a plan. It's almost like thinking about my imposter syndrome. I think some people like encourage you to just deny it. My point of view is it's an emotion you're feeling, and emotions are there for evolutionary reasons. We get scared, we get sad, we get mad, we get happy, all to drive onwards our species, really. And you're probably feeling that imposter syndrome because there is some reality to that. And so go ahead and take a look at what is the reality, what is the skill gap. And I tend to see that anxiety is usually when you don't have a plan or you don't have confidence in your plan. So create a plan and then develop confidence points along the way. Kind of like your product roadmap, right, guys? You have to have your MVP. You have to have, some milestones along the way. You can't expect that you're suddenly going to overcome imposter syndrome in 3 months. It might take a little bit longer than that. It might take a half a year. And you need to build those proof points along the way where at the end of those 6 months, you look back and you say, wow, I have really grown as a person. And that area that I was feeling imposter syndrome in, that was a true gap. That was a true skill set gap, or that was a true emotional IQ intelligence gap. And I have overcome that.
And so the evidence points along the way are moments where you recognize that you are making progress, that you are worthy of your success, that you do know more than you felt like you knew. Is that right? Am I hearing that right?
Well, I think it's very skill specific. So, like in my particular example, right, we talked about basically core product skill sets. So, I realized, like, like there were like these very different buckets of core product skill sets, new products, bugs. I didn't try to just tackle them all at once. So, I broke it down into like its constituent parts, like bugs. Like, I'm going to spend half a day next time me and the engineering tech lead for our most important team are in the office to just go look at all the most important Sev 0 and Sev 1 bugs that we've closed in the last 6 months so that I can really understand, like, okay, what are the nature of the problems in the product? What are the types of problems that really do elevate to this level? What are the types of problems that I need to go wake up my director of engineering, even though it's 2 a.m. on a Saturday versus it can wait till 7 a.m. on a Monday? And so I built out that with like very strong intentionality. And then I would take what I learned around bugs, then I'd go like actually look at the current backlog for Sevs and I say, hey, just based on what I've read about the tickets, and I know there might be more detail that I don't know that's not in Jira, but you guys have 25 tickets labeled Sev 2. I actually think 4 of these could be Sev 3, and one of these might actually want to elevate the Sev. Like, I think we need to solve this, right? So then I'd go in, I'd actually take some action based on what I'd learned, and I'd see if I got positive feedback. And if I get positive feedback, then I've learned like, okay, I've started to figure out this area. And so that's a proof point. And so for me, it's like about finding skill gaps, taking action, and then assessing whether that action was successful or not.
And what I think I also heard you say was that you break these big problems into a lot of very, very small steps and actions and moments along the way. And then you use those moments to get feedback. Is that right?
Yeah, for me, it's like I'm a product person through and through. And so I write like a literal roadmap when I feel imposter syndrome or anxiety. I will write like a literal strategy document. Like, the problem is I don't have that core product leader skill set. The 5 elements of core product leader skill set are this. The 4 that I'm lacking are this. And so the large, big bucket bets I'm going to make to solve this are this. The small little optimizations I'm going to do are this. Literally create a plan, because for me, once I see that plan, once I put it into writing, I have confidence and I don't feel as much imposter syndrome.
Do you listen to any of Alex Hormozy's stuff?
I love him.
Dude, I ask because I just listened to, he was on Modern Wisdom. I forget the host of the podcast, but in it, he talked about this.
Chris Williamson. Yeah, I've literally seen that 24 Harsh Truths episode like 3 times.
Yeah, it was so good. So in it, he talks, for the listeners, he talks about like anytime he's trying to make progress on a big goal, he breaks it up into as many individual checklist items as humanly possible. And then he just ticks them off one by one. And I was like, man, that is so simple and yet so fucking genius. And what I'm hearing you say is you do a customized, a personalized version of that in whatever discipline it is that you're looking to improve, which makes a ton of sense.
Yep, exactly. I just make it a little more product-y.
Right. So you talked a little bit about meditation. You talked about rock climbing. You talked about working out. What are the things that you do today as a creator in your current business if you're having an off day?
I don't know if I'm really allowed to have an off day right now. Right now, the name of the entire business is basically just me. I work like 7 days a week, morning and when the kids go to sleep. So recently, like I had crazy bad stomach flu for like 2 weeks, which like caused all sorts of downstream complications from having that for so long. Like just skipping the gym just to make sure my body gets enough sleep, like reducing my workload to make sure I get enough sleep, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And my entire approach was like, I'm not stopping at all. I think like other people in my family ended up getting it from me and like, they like took the day off and chilled. But that's like currently the stage of phase of life I'm in and how I kind of built the business around me. I can't do that. Like the podcast episodes have to go out. The newsletter episodes have to go out. We don't miss. And so for me, it was like, then, well, how do I create the conditions that I can actually handle this? I need to write an entire newsletter post. And so I actually had to staff up my team. In that period itself, I realized I need to find somebody like right away, like somebody who is available. Like I need a researcher right away. Like I can't afford to write this 5,000 word piece when I'm also just dealing with all this stuff. And so, yeah, I just tried to problem solve, but then continue on. So that's been my current strategy. And I think probably mental health wise, in terms of dealing with that, the most important thing was just looking at like, what's my long-term goal? So off air, we talked about how I want to move to LA. If I want to move to LA, like LA is like 5 times more expensive than where I live right now. So I have certain goals for the business. I want to achieve them. And so just staying to my North Star around that really kept me motivated.
Oh, that's cool. And you talked a little bit about habits and rituals. What are some that help you bring out peak performance today?
Habits and rituals, like, so what my current sort of stack is. So I do like 2 on, 1 off in terms of a hard workout, which includes rock climbing and weights and cardio. So go pretty hard, like hour-and-a-half workout, full everything. On top of that, I'm on athletic greens. So most people will laugh about that. Also use Element after workouts, which is like an electrolyte magnesium sodium supplement, and creatine, which is like for water retention and muscle growth. So that's like my supplement stack. And then I guard like my sleep, like as importantly as I guard my kids' lives. I try to make sure that I get 6 hours, which for me is like a bright line. So actually last night I didn't get 6 hours because my 1-year-old woke me up like 4 times in the middle of the night. And it's like, today is brutal, right? And so like normally I guard that sleep. And I'm like, in retrospect now, my lesson is like, she's still at an age where she might wake up 4 times in the middle of the night. So I can't have 6 hours. I need to have 7. So tonight I'm looking at my work block for when the kids go to sleep, and I just pulled off an hour. So the other thing is this time blocking thing, which is like realistic time blocking. And I go back and in my day, like, of course your day is never going to go as planned, right? But I will go back and update all my time blocks just so I can take a look at it. And I can see like, oh my God, I thought that talking to advertisers was going to take me 30 minutes, but it took me 3 hours because I'm really bad at that. On the other hand, like writing the newsletter, I thought it was gonna take me 6 hours, but it took me 4 because I'm really good at that. Then I'm able to like continuously finesse how I'm time blocking. Then the final thing I do is like the weekly review and the weekly plan ahead. So it's like looking at my time blocks for the last week and looking at my time blocks and calendar for the next week. And am I gonna achieve what I need to achieve in this week? And that week, I've created like goals based on my long North Star goal of basically 5xing the business before I head to LA. And so to do that, like if I need to 5x in 1 year, that means like in 1 week, I need to grow by like 3%. So then across my different business areas, did I grow by 3%? If not, what broke that down? So that's my stack, is like some health life stuff, followed by calendar stuff, followed by like planning stuff.
I want to ask 2 quick follow-up questions. I know we're coming up on time here. And for context, I got a 4-month-old and she was up this morning at 5:40 for the day. And so I'm with you, man. I didn't get a great night of sleep either. And that sometimes can impact you for 2 days. Have you tried any eye masks? I've gotten into like an eye mask algorithm and I'm like I have one in my car. I just haven't checked it out.
Whoa, I need to get an eye mask. I remember that when my first child was waking up this much, like my second child, now that she's 1, she does this very rarely. But when he was doing that kind of on the regular in his 4-month regression, I was doing that. And those do work really well.
I follow Dan Go. He's a fitness influencer and he advocates for this specific eye mask. And I literally have it in my cart. And if I buy it, hopefully he gets a little affiliate commission because I'm only buying it because of his recommendation.
He's awesome.
And do you also do like a monthly review, like a high level business review with yourself?
Not really, but now that I've expanded my team just recently, I think I might need to, because the type of people I've hired are all like, they were product managers because I need them to be able to write product management content or help with product management content. So I think that they would really benefit from it. But for me, like I'm probably in my metrics like daily. And then like on a weekly basis, I hit all my major channels, whether that's like SEO, social media, or newsletter. So that's how I do it right now.
That's super cool. At some point along the way, I started presenting to myself on a monthly basis, almost as if I was the head of growth for my own business. So I'd put together the deck in the same way that I used to put together the deck. And then I try to pretend like I didn't put together the deck and then analyze it and ask questions as if it wasn't me that put together the deck. And I have found that to be one of the rituals to get me out of the day-to-day of the business, which is hard when you have, you're solo or you have a small team. And so it's curious if you had something similar. It sounds like you're headed in that direction.
Yeah, probably for the team, although I'll probably have somebody on the team do it just because I am like an execution oriented person. Like I'm not going to be giving up like every single word in those newsletters. I need to be like sculpting every single word in those social media posts. I still need to be sculpting, even if I have a researcher and an editor. So
yeah, it makes sense. It's your ICP. Dude, thank you for coming on, sharing your journey and exploring a few of the speed bumps with me. I imagine most of my followers are probably following you, but just in case, give us the URL where they can subscribe if they're not already.
Sure, product-growth.com.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.